joined the Scollifar on the Suck downstream from Ballinasloe. We headed on with the river flow, through several centuries of history, past Clonfert and Clonmacnoise. Athlone is the town of the crossings and the gateway to Lough Ree. I met a lot on the way, some of it obvious, some obscure. Lough Ree is a daunting inland sea. It has a vastness, a perspective that brings me back to the courage of the old navigators. To a Viking, this was the dark side of the moon. The Peninsula of Rindon juts into the lake and provides a well-worn landfall. When those early explorers first penetrated its maiden mysteries, they must have been so scared by the wilderness. I leave Scollifar at anchor and take to the angling cot, a significant thing to do as this little blue boat from the Shannon estuary is of pure Viking design, a tangible link with a 1,000-year-old past. Vikings fascinate me because they're such a neglected strand in our history, though it's the Normans who have left the most striking evidence of their visit to Rindon. Ancient battlegrounds are strange places. Violence echoes down the centuries. To think of ourselves as a Celtic people is politically correct, but historically inaccurate. We're the product of many waves of invasion, which left sedimentary layers of culture behind them. When we think of a Viking, we imagine a barbaric Danish pirate with horns on his helmet. Nothing could be further from the truth. But the Irish Vikings were not barbarians, and they never wore helmets with horns on. They just had a bad press. The only people who could write at the time were monks, who didn't like the Vikings because they weren't Christian, and so they retaliated by writing them into the history books as plundering monsters. Who came later and built great stone monuments to paranoia were also Vikings. The word Norman means a man from the north, from Scandinavia. They were another branch of the same civilization who settled in France, conquered England, and then eventually ended up here on the shores of Lough Ree. This finger of land must be one of the most fought-over places in the country. The battle lines can be traced back to the Stone Age. Blood soaking into the clay for thousands of years. And for what? Today, there's a clump of ruins, a bit of woodland, and some scruffy fields with sheep on them. It somehow doesn't seem worth it all. Back on the water, we feel insulated from the violence of the past and relax into boat talk and route planning. We're heading north up the Roscommon shoreline, making for Lough Carrow and the long run up the head of the lake to Lanesborough. key to understanding a place is to get a feel for its history. But this doesn't just mean human history. Further up the shore, there's a wood, St. John's Wood, an ancient and a magic place that provides other clues to the past. It feels primeval.
The primeval forest it's something of a holy grail in the context of Europe. It's questionable whether it exists anywhere in Western Europe. But nonetheless, there are ancient woodlands that have the same species as the primeval forest, woodlands that have come down to us through time, surviving the various vicissitudes of cutting and, in many cases, replanting. There are 23 native trees in this wood. It's a matrix of hazel. Hazel is the most abundant, and the biggest trees are oak and ash, quite a bit of elm, and then you've got some remarkable trees like the Irish whitebeam. It's our only endemic species, found nowhere else in the world but Ireland. Regeneration we do see around the edges, and of course some trees such as oak have a remarkable ability to re-sprout from the cut stumps. Some natural regeneration, but it is a cause for concern. Why aren't there more young oak saplings? We find young oak saplings around the edges, but they're hard to find in the interior of the wood.
A wood like this is more than just a few hundred acres of trees. It's a clue to the old Ireland, the landscape we grew up in, that shaped and formed and made us 5,000 years ago. We leave the forest, dusk is close, and there's a feel about the evening as though a weather change is on the way. So I head the boat for the mouth of a canal cut and the prospect of some shelter for the night.
This little stretch of canal, which links the village of Lough with Lough Ree about halfway up the lake, was constructed in the mid-1840s in order to gain access to quarries to bring down stone for the extensive navigation works which were being constructed in Athlone at that time. And of course all these navigation works in the 1840s were part of a government scheme to provide employment. And the construction of this canal provided employment for about 100 men a day for the period when it was under construction. So it was a very useful source of employment at that time. It then became derelict after the commercial traffic ceased on the Shannon, and for many years boats couldn't get up it. And eventually, as a result of pressure from the Inland Waterways Association, we had the canal dredged out and reopened, because it was a very important port of refuge for the increasing traffic on the river of pleasure boats, who had very few places of refuge on Lough Ree. And it's now become one of the most popular ports of call for the visitors to the Shannon.
The The canal and harbour were built to create jobs. The whole waterway has been a source of employment since the first dugout canoe was commissioned. But this employment has never been more in demand than it is today. I write up the log, a diary of impressions from a long day's travel. Human history and natural history have become very closely entwined on this journey, a fascinating combination. Le Carreau is a port of refuge for us and for other creatures.
Well, there are about 15 species of otter in the world. By far the most important, certainly from our point of view, is the European otter, Lutra, which actually ranges from Ireland through Scandinavia to Japan, if you like. But over the whole of Europe, with the exception of parts of the Highlands of Scotland and Ireland, it is either extinct or endangered. I mean, there are places in Holland where they nearly make a nature reserve if they see the sign that there's an otter in the area, just because there's an otter in the area. Otters occupy a linear territory, a stretch of river or a stretch of lake shore, and if human activity of some sort breaks up the necessary 5 miles or so of river that they need for a territory, then they move on. They can't make do with the two halves, one on either side of the town that's grown up, or the holiday complex that's grown up, or the boating centre that's grown up. And also, of course, there's a question of pollution, which both affects the otter, affects its skin, affects its eyes, and affects its food, the fish.
The wild creatures need peace and quiet. The waterway must not be disturbed. But that doesn't mean neglected. Some management is necessary for both animal and human use. Weeds must be cut to keep a channel open. Wild things need protection. We have responsibilities. We can no longer leave everything to nature. The Office of Public Works owns these ungainly mowing machines. They may look like fat steel ducks waddling down the canal, but they do far less ecological damage than chemical weed control. The weather's getting worse. We plough on towards Lanesborough at the head of the lake, and it feels as though we'll never get there. As we batter against the water, my mind drifts back to the Vikings of Rindon. They gave us many things. They founded our first towns, introduced us to the idea of money, taught us to sail boats and ride horses properly, popularized the wearing of trousers and the use of combs. Gentle people, very keen on family life, seafarers, farmers and merchants. They were the civilizers, the native Irish were the barbarians. And this plundering thing has to be put into perspective too. It was really no more rapacious than the activities of tax collectors today. And there's plenty of evidence that the Vikings were more restrained in their tax gathering than the native Irish chieftains. There are fashions in financial morality. The great Viking leader Turgesius would have regarded a tax return as a monstrous crime. In the Middle Ages, to charge high interest rates to people who borrowed money was regarded by the church as a sin called usury, which was punished by excommunication. Lanesborough is crawling closer at last. When the Vikings set their great ships to travel up the lake, they probably went at about the same speed as our diesel-powered barge yacht from Holland, or a little faster, somewhere between 6 and 10 miles an hour. This made it about the fastest form of long-distance travel the world had ever seen. They must have thrilled to the speed. While I'm so conditioned by an age of rapid transport that the slowness irritates me. I'm impatient to get out of the raw weather, leave the lake, return to the river and get the day's run over with. You have to develop a sense of rhythm about a journey. It's like dancing with a partner. Haven is another word for harbour, and this will certainly feel like a haven from the elements. We're cold, tired, hungry, but a rumour's kept us going. A rumour of a cosy berth with a floating restaurant run by English people where we can enjoy some 20th century comfort.
There was no place really for the tourists to go, bar up to the pubs. There was no real restaurant for them to go and have a good meal. So Ronnie and Maureen came over from England, and I was talking to them before they purchased it, and they told me what they wanted to do with the place, and it sounded, you know, a really good choice or decision to do, because before they came, there was nothing really here for tourists. Oh, mainly German, some French and Dutch and Swiss, and then English, and then the locals from Roscommon or Longford, but they only make up a small proportion of the people that come to eat in the restaurant.
Were you in Lanesborough in the old days?
I was. I first came into Lanesborough in 1941.
During the war?
During the war, yes.
Lanesborough must have looked a bit different in those days.
It was completely different than today.
Was the power station there?
No way, no.
Did you have any rough days coming across the lake?
I did. One that I remember that I blew onto Quaker Island. It was that rough that the diesel oil, the fuel oil went into froth, and we got an airlock. And we got blown onto the island. We're there for a night and a day.
A night and a day?
A night and a day, we're there all day. And we had no food on the boat, you know. So there was a lot of wild goats out on the island, and we had a butcher working with us, you know. He'd done butchering before he joined us as boatman, and we got a light line and we lassoed a goat, killed it, skinned it, hung it up in the ballast tank, and every so often we'd go back and we'd cut a piece off the goat and fry it in the pan.
Real Robinson Crusoe carne.
More than that. That's right, yeah. They were tough days, they were.
In the morning, I must visit the thumping heart of Lanesborough, the ESB generating station. The Electricity Supply Board and Bord na Móna, winning the peat to fuel the power station, work in partnership and dominate the economic life of the Midlands. To me, they symbolise a less pessimistic chapter in the history of this country, a time of patriotic vision and grand schemes to create prosperity.
Well, we burn of the order of 800,000 tonnes of mill peat a year. This is supplied by Bord na Móna from local bogs in the vicinity of Lanesborough, anything from 2 to 15 miles from the station. It's supplied in trains or rakes of wagons, 15 wagons per train, and we utilise about anything between 40 and 50 train loads every day.
The hungry throat of the power station is gobbling down the Midland bogs. The easy environmental reflex is to condemn this, but it's meant a decent living for a generation of people, and though the bog is a thing of beauty and value, it's not necessarily a landscape for all time. I think we can conserve some bog and still allow ourselves a sense of wonder and admiration for what's going on here. even if some easy preconceptions get overturned in the process. This whole operation is a vision dating from an era when Irish people believed with passion that enough time had been spent dancing to the tune of all the invading cultures. Now we could compose our own music, and we would do it better. And there's another green paradox in Lanesborough, a couple of 100 yards from the power station.
We get our heat here from the power station at Lanesborough. Hot water comes from the turbines, which is waste heat from the power station, and we extract heat from that and return it at a much lower temperature. The heat comes into a four-way valve, and our computer decides how much heat we require in the glasshouse, and it takes whatever heat it requires from that point and distributes it through the glasshouse and brings the temperature up to our optimal levels. It's a very high tech. It's completely computerized and automated. We have about 4 to 5 full-time people here employed and about 5 other people part-time for the summer. We're actually harvesting or picking tomatoes from around the end of February up to mid-November. They're principally sold in the western counties, in Galway, Mayo, Sligo and Roscommon. We substitute imported tomatoes in those areas. In the past, we pollinated plants by a manual means, by going along and tapping each plant to shake the pollen around in the flower. But in the last 2 years, we buy in bumblebees, and the bees go along and actually pollinate the flowers 7 days a week without any complaints.
People who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. Instead, they should stop to think. Thoughts about what is the acceptable price of progress and what is unacceptable. I leave Lanesborough behind, prompted into some environmental reassessments. My mind is unsettled, questioning, in tune with the array of Atlantic weather fronts sailing in from the west. I feel I've learned something in this town, and learning is not always a comfortable process. I have been provoked. The tall stacks, plumed with steam, dominate the horizon long after the town itself drops out of sight. They look somehow as though they have not been built, but have germinated and grown here. On and on, further upriver, addicted already to the perpetual motion, unable to stop. There is a compulsion that keeps a boat going ahead. Travelling into Ireland in a white teardrop.